taas ang kamot sa 65 years old and above. Ayaw mo kahadlok, dili lagi mo dakpon. 65 years old and above. Ayaw kaulaw. Kay grasya ang miabot og 65 years old and above. Mga igsuon, karong adlaw ang unang World Day of Grandparents and Elderly. In other words, we are celebrating ang mga igsuon nato nga 65 years old and above. Gideclare karon nga Domingo ni Pope Francis as World Day of Grandparents and Elderly. So atong palakpakan atong mga elderly o grandparents, atong mga lolo, atong mga lola nga naa dinhi o naa sa atong tagsa-tagsa kapanimalay. Mao mga igsuon, supposedly sa atong kalendaryo sa simbahan, karon unta ang gigahin alang sa Philippine Mission Sunday. But in view of the World Day of Grandparents and the Elderly, gipostpone or gimove ang Film Mission Sunday sa August, and instead, we are celebrating today the Day of Grandparents and Elderly. Unsa may tumong niining kuan, niining kasaulugan nato, why celebrate grandparents and elderly? According to Pope Francis, to remind our elderly and our grandparents na ang simbahan wala makalimot kaninyo. That during this time of pandemic, among those who are badly affected by this crisis, kay ang atong mga igsuon na mga lolo, lola, mga tigulang o katong mga advanced in age. In other words, the Church, through the proclamation of Pope Francis, wants to send the message that we are one with you. Nagauban ang simbahan kaninyo. We are one with you. Ikaduha, for us also to learn from the experience of grandparents and the elderly. Nga naman, ingon pa ni Pope Francis, the proclamation of the gospel is not about a matter of age. Gulang ka man, 65 years old, above ka man, you have the very capacity to proclaim the good news of our salvation. But I want to connect the celebration to our readings for today. Our readings for today, kung atong mabantayan, has this one theme. Unsa man ni nga tema? It's all about feeding. Feeding, no? In our first reading, na dito atong nadunggan nga si Elisha, giapod-apod ang pan aron ipakaon sa kadaghanan. In our gospel also, we heard about Jesus feeding a multitude gikan sa 5 kapan o isda. And then in our second reading, nag-ingon si San Pablo ato sa mga taga-Efeso, feed each other through your good works because we are one body in Christ. In other words, our readings for today, kung atong tahion kani, it's about feeding o ang pagpakaon sa uban. And I think one of those who exemplified what feeding is ay ang atong mga igsuon na mga tigulang. Atong mga lolo, atong mga lola, ug katong mga advanced in age. In what ways? Una, we were able to be fed by the memory of our grandparents and the elderly. Matod pa ni Pope Francis, the elderly and the grandparents are the memory of our times. Unsa iyang pasabot? They are holders or they are monuments of history. Kita, mga batanon, kita nga karon bag-o pa lang usbong, we were able to know our past through the stories of our grandparents and elderly. In other words, our lolo, our lola, katong mga nauna na nato, they are feeding us with stories of the past. And if we listen carefully to these stories, there are actually life lessons na pwede natong makatunan, pwede natong ma-apply sa atong adlaw-adlaw nga kinabuhi o sa atong kinabuhi sa pagtuo. they are feeding us through their memory. Because first and foremost, they are living memories. Ikaduha, the elderly, the grandparents are feeding us with their dreams. With their dreams. It is very beautiful to reflect and to realize that we young generations are actually products of the dreams of our grandparents. Makaingon pa ta, unang nagdamgo ang atong mga lolo o mga lula, and here we are reaping the fruits of their dreams. And what is that for us? It also means to each one of us, it sends a message to each one na importante ang damgo. No, importante ang damgo. It reminds each one of us to continue dreaming like our grandparents and the elderly among us. Ikatulo, they are feeding us through their life of prayer. Di ba makita nato atong mga lolo o lola, karon gani kuan gyud ni sila mga risk takers, no? Mga risk takers because they really want to live out their faith by joining Eucharistic celebrations, by joining celebrations din sa atong simbahan. They are feeding us through their life of witness, through their prayers. And that also reminds us na kung wala ang mga pag-ampo sa atong mga lolo o lola, our narrative, our story will be different, will not be the same. So kini nagpasabot, our grandparents and elderly are feeding us through their memories, through their dreams, and through their prayers. No, mao kana. But I think we have a further challenge here. Mas dako ang challenge kanato. Una, nga naman, we have to realize through the example of our grandparents and elderly that we are not only made for ourselves. We do not exist only for our own. We always have to remember kung unsa ang mahitabo o unsa ang resulta sa atong decisions o ang atong mga actions today to the generations next to us. Matud pa sa usa ka sa akong teacher sa college, Mark, you are not actually a product of your parents or your mother and father. You are a product of your grandparents, of your lolo and lola. And I do believe that, my dear brothers and sisters, we are not products of our parents. We are products of the dreams, of the prayers, and of the memory of our grandparents. And unsa may hagit ni ini kanato tanan. Ang hagit ni ini is for us to be more mindful, to become more conscious of our decision making, knowing ang akong decision karon is not only feeding myself, but I am feeding the person next to me, the generation to come. And if we want a good future, if we envision a beautiful future for each one of us, then let us feed one another with good words, with good works, and good actions. In other words, dinha sa atong ebanghelyo karon, Jesus is reminding us to be compassionate. Not only compassionate, is reminding us to be practical in our compassion. Dili lamang muingon nga, I am one with you, I am suffering with you. But to say, I suffer with you and let me do this for you. Daghan kayo gibuhat na ni sa atong mga lolo o lola sa atua. Diba? They have suffered a lot for each one of us. I hope maokini ang atong dalon as we celebrate the very first day, the very first World Day of Grandparents and Elderly. Dili lamang kita para sa atong kaugalingon, kundili we are feeding the next generation. We are feeding the children of the future. O nindot kaayo ang imagery ni St. Paul sa atong second reading today, sayang sulat nga to sa mga taga-Efeso. Nganuman, unsay ingon ni San Pablo sa atong second reading today. Ingon ni San Pablo, pag tinabangay kamo, kay kamo usa ka lawas ug usa ka espiritu. Saint Paul is actually reminding us of the image that we are one body. As parts of one body, in other words, every decisions nga atong himuon, every actions that we take has repercussions to the other parts, to the other members of the body. My dear brothers and sisters, our celebration this Sunday and our readings this Sunday are reminding each one of us that we are not only for ourselves, we are for one another and for the generation next to us. And so, let us feed one another with good works, good actions, and good examples. Because let us dream together, let us envision together a future that is better, a future that is more beautiful. And so as we continue this Eucharistic celebration, atong iampo katong atong mga igsuon, atong mga lolo, mga lola, o those elderly, especially those who got sick because of COVID-19. O ato pang pasalamatan ang Ginoo sa grasya sa atong mga apuhan. Hinaot paunta.